Tan Xiao climbed up the ruins of an unfinished building. Looking down, she saw the leisurely wealth of the villa district and, just across the street, a bustling shopping mall teeming with people. Standing amidst the ruins of what was meant to be home, she felt even more lost than she had a decade ago. The name Tan Xiao might sound a bit poetic, but she said it was simply because she was born in autumn. Autumn meant an abundant harvest, and adding a new family member was usually cause for joy. But when she crawled out of her mother's womb, someone spread her legs and saw she wasn't a boy. The joy immediately turned to disappointment. It was harvest season, the busiest time of the year, and the birth had delayed the work, depriving the family of a laborer. Everyone in the family resented her, wishing they could throw her down a dry well and let her fend for herself. Fortunately, times had changed, and such things were no longer allowed. Otherwise, Tan Xiao might have become just another ghost haunting a lonely well. She had no name even after her confinement period, with everyone calling her Girl. Tan Xiao's mother couldn't stand it any longer and urged the head of the household to give her a name. The man, puffing on a cigarette that clicked with each drag, opened his mouth to speak, only for the cigarette to fall to the ground. He bent down to pick it up, blew off the dust, and put it back in his mouth. "Such bad luck," he cursed. "Taking my son's place, and now she needs a name?" He glanced outside at the corn drying on the ground. Tan Xiao would later mock her name bitterly. "What kind of name is that? You city folks spend more time naming your cats and dogs than they did on me." She greeted me with reverence. "Hello, lawyer sir." Her formal tone made me laugh. It was as if she were acting in a period drama, addressing me like an imperial official. Her second sentence was, "I've committed a crime. What should I do?" The crowd of retirees in the neighborhood scattered like startled birds at the word crime, watching her warily from a distance. "Don't worry," I said. "Take your time and explain." Her story was jumbled and incoherent, repeating the same details over and over. It took a lot of effort to piece it together. Her case was minor but intricate. Taking it on wouldn't just mean no commission. It likely wouldn't even cover the consultation fee. But turning her away felt heartless as I looked at her tear-stained, swollen eyes. They reminded me of a long-buried memory. In the end, I gritted my teeth and agreed to take her case. She stammered that she didn't have much money. I handed her a cup of warm water and waited until her pale, grayish fingertips regained some color before speaking. "Don't worry about it. Let's just say we're making friends." Tan Xiao's story was an old one, a classic portrait of an eldest daughter exploited by her family. She had dropped out after middle school to work and provide for her family, believing it was only natural for an elder sister to sacrifice herself. At 24, she fell in love for the first time and brought her boyfriend home. Her parents didn't care about his character or personality. They only interrogated him about his family background and salary. Perhaps they were so used to exploiting Tan Xiao that they didn't bother hiding it even in front of her boyfriend. While Tan Xiao and her mother were cooking in the kitchen, her father and the man chatted in the living room. With his feet propped up on the coffee table, her father took a sip of white liquor, smacked his lips loudly, and spoke. "The bride price is 166,000 yuan, not a penny less." His chin tilted up arrogantly. "I've raised this girl to be hardworking and capable. She can do anything, and she's pretty too. Marrying her means a life of comfort for you." Her father winked at the man with a knowing expression. Tan Xiao saw everything clearly from her hiding spot. It made her uncomfortable. "Lawyer Shaoli," she later asked me in confusion, "why did my father seem closer to my boyfriend than to me? Why do men form alliances so quickly and exclude others?" Tan Xiao was lucky her boyfriend turned out to be decent. After leaving her family's home, he broke up with her. She truly loved him and clung to him, crying and pleading. "Why are you leaving me? Is it because of the bride price? I'll save up for it with you, or I'll talk to my father and ask him to lower it." But her voice grew weaker with every word, like the faint buzz of a mosquito. The man sighed. "Xiao Qiu, I do like you. My family could afford the 166,000 yuan, but we're not right for each other. Let's not waste each other's time. Before leaving, he gave her a final piece of advice. Xiao Qiu, you're a good girl. But if you don't cut ties with your family, your life will be ruined. At the time, Tan Qiu didn't understand what he meant. She bought a bottle of cheap liquor, drank it all on the side of the road, and shouted curses into the empty night. She hated him for being heartless, for lacking the courage to stay. At the end of the month, her father called again. His first sentence was, "Your brother's school expenses are high this month. You'll have to cut your living expenses by 300 yuan. Before she could respond, he continued, "When will your bride price be ready? Your brother isn't young anymore. As his sister, you should think about his future. He'll need a house. Since you're in the city, keep an eye out for suitable apartments for him." Sober and clear-headed, Tan Qiu snapped. It was the final straw. For the first time, she screamed and shouted at her family, asking over and over, "Why does my brother still rely on the family when he's already so grown? I started working after middle school to support myself. I've been working for years, but I don't have a penny to my name because my salary goes straight to your account. Why can't I decide what to do with my own money? When my boyfriend came over for the first time, you demanded such a high bride price. If I had control over my salary, we could have saved up together. Do you think he would have been scared off if we had a plan? You didn't even ask me, just kept demanding money. Money." Her father's voice was calm, almost disdainful. "You're useless. Can't even hold on to a man." Tan Qiu looked up at the sky, her voice choked with emotion. "That's when I gave up on them." Tan Qiu always spoke loudly, a habit from her years of work. It often drew stares from those around her. It wasn't until she realized her parents didn't love her that she understood she had no way out. So, she worked desperately hard. She took dangerous jobs in unregulated steel factories, enduring deafening noise that eventually damaged her hearing. Tan Qiu rambled on endlessly, pouring out her frustrations about how she tried to please her parents, how much she gave for her family, the injustices she endured, and how much effort it took to escape her dysfunctional upbringing. Like Xiang Lin's wife in the old tales, she recounted her grievances incessantly and heartbreakingly, paying no mind to my growing impatience. Her lack of boundaries stemmed from never having a space of her own. Her parents could only afford a small 2-bedroom apartment in the county. 1 bedroom for her parents, 1 for her brother, and Tan Qiu had to make do with a curtain in the living room. Late at night, she was often jolted awake by the sound of the toilet flushing, lying there wide-eyed until dawn. After starting work, her salary was controlled by her parents. The little money she had left couldn't cover rent, so she lived in an 8-person dormitory at the factory. With the factory running 3 shifts, her schedule rarely aligned with her roommates. Just as she fell asleep, someone would either return from work or leave for their shift, flipping lights on and off, dressing, washing up, slamming doors. Once the noise finally subsided, and Tan Qiu tried to roll over for more sleep, the iron bunk bed creaked loudly. So, the first thing she decided to do after gaining independence was to save up for her own home. If she couldn't afford a place in the city center, then she'd buy one in the suburbs. If a 3-bedroom apartment was out of reach, then a 1-bedroom would do. Tan Qiu scoured the entire city, and on her 33rd birthday, she finally found a suitable place. Housing prices in smaller cities weren't too high, and her savings were just enough for the down payment. After covering the monthly mortgage, she could still set some money aside. She even planned to learn to drive next year and buy herself a small van by the end of the following year. Her first major hurdle on the path to her ideal life was her credit record. Her account history was too sparse, and she had no assets to her name, so she couldn't qualify for a loan. Tan Qiu, drenched in anxiety, was approached by a sales agent who handed her a cup of tea and, glancing around to ensure no one was listening, whispered, "Don't worry, we have a solution." "Really?" Tan Qiu's eyes lit up with hope. "Of course. We deal with cases like yours all the time." The agent patted their chest in reassurance. You just need a third-party company to fabricate some transaction records for you. It's just for show. Isn't that deceitful? Tan Xiao hesitated. Deceitful? Not at all. The agent denied it flatly. Look, you need to buy a house, the developer needs to sell houses, and the bank needs to lend money. It's a win-win-win situation. Besides, we're not stealing or robbing anyone. It's just a matter of making things look good on paper. Ma'am, this is a prime location, rare opportunity. Just look at the community, complete facilities, lush greenery. Once you move in, the agent was a smooth talker, and with a few words, they persuaded Tan Xiao. She hesitantly nodded and arranged a meeting with a third-party company. I sighed. I could already guess what happened next, even without Tan Xiao elaborating. The so-called third-party company laundering money under the guise of creating transaction records was a scam. They claimed to fabricate a financial trail by transferring funds to the victims, who would then withdraw the money. In reality, this was a money laundering scheme. Tan Xiao successfully secured the loan and bought the apartment, eagerly waiting for the handover. She even bought a large fish tank for her dorm, staring at the empty tank and imagining her future life, blissfully unaware that she had fallen into a trap. I didn't even catch whether his name was Chun or Chung, she cried, tears streaming down her face. Every time I transferred money, it was to a different account. It's been more than half a year now. I was at work when the police summoned me, saying I was part of an illegal money transfer scheme. I didn't even know what money laundering meant. They asked how much I profited and told me to return the illegal gains. They said I was committing a crime. I didn't make a profit. I even paid a 5% service fee. She sobbed so hard that snot hung from her nose, glistening in the sunlight. Before I could hand her a tissue, she wiped it off with her sleeve. Her hair was dry and yellowed, her back bent like a stalk of wheat. Stop crying, I said, raising my voice. Tan Xiao stopped sobbing instantly, holding her breath like a startled animal, staring at me as if in a trance. Tan Xiao is a good name, I said. Huh. And your case isn't a big deal. Tan Xiao, who had always been honest and straightforward, had never been to a police station. Just hearing the word crime had left her terrified. As her lawyer, I went to the station to understand the situation and learned that the police had only taken her statement. They weren't planning to prosecute her. She's just another victim, the officer told me, but her bank account might be frozen for a while. I relayed this to Tan Xiao. Thank God. Thank God. Tan Xiao clasped her hands in gratitude. Loyally, thank you so much. You're my savior. When I move into my new house, I'll definitely invite you over. I'd heard such words many times before. They were just the pleasantries of adults, like the someday that never comes. But Tan Xiao was different. She seemed to treat repaying my kindness as a mission. She regularly updated me on her new apartment's progress, how the first batch had been topped off, how her building had started construction. Sometimes, she'd vent her frustrations to me, always ending with, "Loyally, I haven't forgotten your kindness." I didn't take it seriously. What could a woman from the countryside, who hadn't even had much schooling, possibly do to repay me? But Tan Xiao's frequent messages became exhausting. Her excessive emotional outpourings were draining. She'd send me long accounts of her past grievances, rehashing the same incidents over and over. When I tried to ignore her, she'd call me, oblivious to my cold response. Bluntly and forcefully, with a mix of raw honesty and a hint of ingratiation, she'd ask, "Loyally, why aren't you replying? Aren't we friends?" She reminded me of winters in middle school, when the snow seemed endless. Gusts of wind would blow snowflakes into my clothes, chilling me to the bone. Once inside, the classroom's heating would melt the snow into damp patches on my clothes, which would freeze into icy lumps when I went back outside. My mother, worried about me, took apart one of my father's old red woolen pants and turned it into a scarf for me. But I only wore it once. The rough wool itched against my neck, leaving a ring of red marks that made me look like a hanged ghost. My mother tried all sorts of remedies, soaking it in hot water, softening it with vinegar, but the aged wool couldn't withstand the treatment and broke into pieces in the enamel basin. Standing with her back to me, my mother stared at the basin for a long time before letting out a deep sigh. That was the most difficult year for our family. My father lost his right hand in a factory accident. The wound festered all summer. The factory manager took advantage of our ignorance, threatening and sweet-talking us into believing we owed them money for the damaged machine. My mother brought a basket of eggs to plead with him. 30 large, carefully counted eggs. In the end, the manager handed my mother 200 yuan, saying, "This is company property, worth millions. I know you can't afford it, so I've been working behind the scenes for you. This matter is settled now. The 200 yuan is for old Lee's treatment. It's not much, but I've spent quite a bit helping you out." My mother accepted the money and bowed deeply, pulling me down with her. Later, I learned that my father's injury was classified as a workplace accident. Not only did we not owe the factory money, but they were obligated to compensate us. I told my mother, outraged. She didn't react, didn't make a fuss. She just sighed deeply into the void, afraid of causing bigger trouble. Poor people are always cautious, weighing every decision carefully, only to end up saying, "Forget it. It's just a shame about those 30 eggs." Tan Xiu's eyes overlapped with my mother's as she sighed, and her overbearing gratitude reminded me of that itchy, red scarf. My feelings toward Tan Xiu were complicated. She always reminded me of the past, making it impossible for me to ignore her. Yet, she also stirred up the traumas of my childhood, which made me want to avoid her. Caught in these conflicting emotions, I remained as silent as an ostrich burying its head in the sand, relying on her initiative to maintain our relationship. Then one day, she stopped reaching out to me. 2 months after we lost contact, I couldn't hold back anymore. On her birthday, I sent her a simple message, just 8 words. "I wish you a fresh start in life." Tan Xiu didn't reply immediately. It wasn't until after midnight that she sent me a voice message. Her voice carried a calmness that bordered on madness. "Sister, I have no new beginning." Tan Xiu's apartment project had fallen through. It all started when she visited the construction site after work to see if they had built up to her floor. She noticed that while the site was bustling with activity, there was no actual progress. Soon after, the heavy machinery began disappearing, and eventually, even the last 2 workers vanished. The construction site turned into a ghost town. Tilting her head back, Tan Xiu carefully counted the stories of her building. It had reached the 8th floor. I had seen her mortgage information and purchase contract. Her unit was on the 9th floor. The building, draped in green safety nets, revealed steel bars dangling precariously inside. Determined, she climbed up and stood on the rooftop, feeling utterly lost. Next door was a villa community where well-dressed residents strolled leisurely. Across the street, a bustling mall teemed with people coming and going. Standing on the rooftop, on her 35th birthday, Tan Xiu reflected. 10 years ago, she had escaped her family, promising herself that she would have a home of her own in a decade. Now, standing in what was supposed to be her home, she felt more lost than she had the day she fled. She remained on that rooftop the entire day, watching people finish work and nearby apartments light up one by one. As the autumn wind blew, she sent me a voice message. "Sister, I have no new beginning." When I picked her up later, I almost didn't recognize her. Standing under the street lamp, her face seemed veiled in shadow. She had grown gaunt, her sunken eyes like deep, dark pits that could swallow everything. "Lawyer Shaoli, I'm sorry, but I can't invite you to my place anymore," she said apologetically as soon as she got in the car. The old red scarf, torn and frayed, had been unraveled by my mother and blended into an old cotton duvet she sewed for me during the new year. As she tucked me in, she sat by my bedside, her face lit by the harsh white light, making her expression unreadable. My father hadn't made it past the spring festival. He went from being taciturn to refusing food, his health deteriorating until he passed away in that new quilt, never waking again. My mother said, he died from depression. On the day of the burial, she stood blankly before his grave. No complaints, no tears. Holding my hand, she said, "Girl, I'm sorry. Our family has wronged you. Being born into this home made you suffer." To this day, I can't understand why my mother apologized to me at my father's grave, just as I don't understand why Tan Xiao now seems to be apologizing too. I couldn't find the words to respond. I simply stared at her face, much as I had once stared at my mother's by the grave. Tan Xiao was more tenacious than my parents. In the 2 months we were out of contact, she had tried everything she could think of. She didn't understand legal procedures, only old-fashioned methods. In rural areas, when neighbors took over someone's property and negotiations failed, people would stir up trouble, making life unbearable for the other party until they gave in. Following that logic, Tan Xiao stood under the corrugated iron fence holding a red banner. She wasn't good with words, so her banner bore just 5 large characters. "Give me my hard-earned money." At first, the homeowners were united. A large group stood together, creating an intimidating presence. The developers, however, hired a gang of thugs who charged into the crowd, beating people indiscriminately before fleeing. Many were injured, but Tan Xiao suffered the worst. When they tried to snatch her banner, she refused to let go. A brick to her head left her bleeding profusely. A neighbor, Aunt Wang, rushed her to a clinic where she had 5 stitches sewn without anesthetic. As the doctor worked, Aunt Wang gripped her hand tightly, her own palms sweaty. She nervously fiddled with Tan Xiao's pinky finger, murmuring incessantly, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" The needle pierced her skin and emerged on the other side, yet Tan Xiao gritted her teeth, biting down hard on her lower lip. She didn't make a sound or shed a tear. "Maybe we should let it go. Find another way. You can't risk your life over this," Aunt Wang muttered as she helped her out of the clinic. Tan Xiao didn't argue or agree. She simply returned to the site day after day, holding her red banner high. The scar on her forehead curled like a centipede, a badge of honor. Unable to persuade her, Aunt Wang began making detours during her bottle collecting rounds just to check on her. Someone suggested, "All this fussing doesn't work. It's just scratching the surface. The only way to get results is to pressure higher-ups to issue orders." Taking the advice to heart, Tan Xiao stepped into an internet cafe for the first time in her life. Among gamers and live stream viewers, she searched for who oversees building projects. She went to the petition office, sat there resolutely, and refused to budge. No matter what anyone said, she repeated one demand: either finish building the apartment or return her money. She couldn't understand the bureaucratic jargon or trust the mediation process. She simply sat there, tirelessly repeating her request. In the end, her composure snapped. It was like 10 years ago, when she had broken down while demanding money from her parents over the phone. Screaming at the staff, she demanded, "Why are you all trying to talk me out of this? Why? I gave them my money, and now my home is gone. Why is everyone telling me to let it go? What did I do wrong? All I want is my money back. Is that so unreasonable?" The warmth of the car's heater fogged the windows, and Tan Xiao's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I didn't dare meet her gaze. "Tell me, how can there be such injustice in this world?" she muttered, her head tilted as if speaking to herself or asking me. I took the initiative to handle the homeowners' class action lawsuit, and for the first time, there was a faint light in Tan Xiao's previously dull eyes. She turned her head to look at me. The warm air from the car heater stirred her hair, strands of which fell across her face at an angle. "I don't have much money," she said, repeating the same words from our first meeting. "It's okay. Let's just consider it making a friend," I replied, echoing what I had said back then. "Sis," Tan Xiao called out solemnly. She had initially addressed me as lawyer, later switching to lawyerly, reflecting the single boundary she observed in her otherwise boundaryless demeanor. This was the first time she had crossed it. "Why are you helping me so much?" Tan Xiao asked softly. "I've got nothing." I had never told anyone that my mom had privately approached the foreman. She had gripped his sleeve tightly, gritting her teeth as she spoke in a ground-down voice. She said, "You owe our family compensation money. Where is it?" The foreman didn't continue lying to her, nor did he offer an explanation. He simply replied in an even tone, "If you behave yourself, you'll still be able to get by. But if you keep stirring things up, Old Lee will lose more than just a hand." The foreman's coarse face trembled as he spoke, the heat from his body and breath enveloping her. "Your kid is in the second year of middle school, right?" The foreman calmly pulled his sleeve out of her grasp. His tone was cordial, just like on the recruitment day, but only she could discern the deeper meaning behind it. A chill ran down her spine, and cold sweat drenched her back. She didn't remember how she got home. The next thing she knew, her daughter was telling her, "The factory should compensate us." She opened her mouth as if to say something but stayed silent. Looking at her daughter beside her, her soft spot, she sighed deeply, saying only, "Forget it. It's just a shame about those 30 eggs." I didn't want to recall that moment of poverty, cowardice, ignorance, and short-sightedness. More than that, I hated myself for being a burden to my family, a stumbling block that forced my mother to compromise with evil. Yet after meeting Tan Xiao, I found myself revisiting that memory time and time again. Tan Xiao was just as trapped. She was like an untamed calf, having escaped from a blood-sucking, feudal household. She endured the chaos and prying eyes of a crowded 8-person dormitory. She was relentless. She fought back, and she sought her own salvation. Her vitality was so fierce that it even wounded me. I often wondered, if Tan Xiao had faced the foreman, what would she have done? Would she have gone all out, burning her bridges? Would she have fought tooth and nail, like a shrew making a scene? It was only after I studied law that I realized the world is far darker than it appears. Could someone as headstrong as Tan Xiao bear the consequences? In the warm, yellow car light, her eyes glistened. Struggling with my words, I said, "The result might not be ideal. Things could end up worse than they are now." "I'm not afraid." Tan Xiao shook her head. "I've got nothing to lose." I looked into her eyes, as though staring at the woman from years ago, holding a basket of eggs. I could never blame my parents for their lack of courage. They had to tread carefully for each other, and for me. But now, for Tan Xiao, I was willing to try, just to see if justice could truly triumph over evil. Tan Xiao, worried I wouldn't believe her, repeated anxiously, "Sis, really, I'm not afraid of anything." I said, "One day, you'll have everything." The neighborhood had sold over 300 houses, but only 15 families were willing to join the class action lawsuit. "Why don't you care? Don't you want your money back?" Tan Xiao asked, puzzled, through a crack in the door. "We're just too tired," replied a woman from inside, her face showing exhaustion amid the noise. Tan Xiao didn't know the woman well. They had held banners together and exchanged a few words. All she knew was that the woman was in her 30s, had 2 children in elementary school, and worked in insurance sales while her husband labored in a factory. "What about the money?" Tan Xiao persisted. The noise inside was overwhelming. Tan Xiao was reminded of the sound of saws cutting wood when houses were built in her hometown. She tilted her head to peek inside, spotting a little boy playing an instrument. "You should ask someone else. I just can't handle this right now." The woman tried to close the door. Tan Xiao rushed to stop it, and her hand got caught, turning purple and swollen. The woman sighed and stepped out into the hallway, pulling her cotton robe tighter. "I really can't manage. You've seen it. I have 2 kids to look after, and I work during the day. My husband isn't much help. He's always working overtime. I just don't have the energy for this." She gestured toward the scar on Tan Xiao's head. "Besides, you saw how ruthless they can be. I have a family. I can't take that kind of risk." Tan Xiao touched the raised scar on her head. She couldn't tell whether it was the scar or her bruised hand that hurt more. "I think you should give up, too. We can't fight them. Just wait. Maybe in a couple of years, they'll start building again. The land isn't going anywhere, right? Sitting downstairs from the woman's apartment, Tan Chio sent me a voice message, her frustration evident against the howling wind in the background. But I couldn't console her because I had just narrowly escaped an attack in an underground parking lot. It started with bribes, stacks of cash placed in front of me, accompanied by smiling faces urging me to step aside. I can't say I wasn't tempted. I came from nothing, and I knew the sting of hunger and cold. I knew how scratchy cheap knitted scarves could be, and how even a penny could block the path of a hero. After all, Tan Chio was just a client I met through legal aid. But Tan Chio's tearful, hopeful eyes kept surfacing in my mind. They made me wonder, had my mother also wished for someone to help her back then? Then came the threats. Several burly men tried to appear refined, their veiled hostility lurking beneath polite words. Lawyerly, you're about to be promoted to managing attorney, aren't you? It's not easy for women to succeed in this field, especially someone like you, without any connections. One of them asked, "Do you still plan to continue practicing law?" Their seemingly light words struck me like a hammer, reverberating like thunder in my ears. Was my mother threatened in the same way back then? Did she endure humiliation and swallow her pain with a forced smile? To hell with you. I spat, carrying with it the indignity my mother had once suffered. The spit glistened under the light, reflecting countless versions of my face. That night, I was cornered in an underground parking lot. A gang of boys, barely teenagers, armed with iron rods, guarded the elevator exit like hyenas. The scraping of the rods against the ground sent a chilling noise through the air. Hiding in the trunk of my car, I could hear their footsteps and breathing, separated from me by just a layer of metal. I didn't dare imagine if the next blow would land on my temple. It wasn't until the sound of police sirens echoed that I dared to climb out of the trunk. A female officer helped me up, asking if I was okay. I couldn't speak, only shaking my head. At that moment, I finally understood the meaning of my mother's silence before her sigh all those years ago, a mixture of helplessness and fear. Before the final court session to discuss the case, the 15 households were reduced to 13. 2 families sent me a brief message, asterisk, we're dropping the case, asterisk, and promptly blocked me. I dared not voice my suspicions. I feared they might have been bribed, or worse, threatened. But thankfully, 13 households still stood firm. It's fine. Let's set an example for the rest, Aunt Wong said, noticing Tan Chio's low spirits. Aunt Wong was the oldest among them. She always carried a massive canvas bag, faded and grimy, stuffed with assorted water bottles. I didn't know much about her, only what Tan Chio had shared. Aunt Wong's new home was right across from Tan Chio's. She often clung timidly to Tan Chio, her eyes filled with the confusion and fear of someone left behind by the times. Her frail hands were forever clutching Tan Chio's little finger, rubbing it nervously. On Tan Chio's birthday, we sat in my car. She covered her face and murmured, her voice muffled. How can they be so heartless? I've got hands and feet. I'll survive somehow. But Aunt Wong? At her age, she's been forced to scavenge bottles just to make ends meet. How can they sleep at night? I was at a loss for words. The scar on Tan Chio's forehead, jagged and raised, felt like a dull knife tearing at my heart repeatedly. Even in such dire circumstances, Tan Chio still worried about others. She was always this genuine and unpretentious. As we left, Tan Chio grabbed me. She leaned in close, her forehead brushing my ear. Sis, tell me the truth. Can we win this? Tan Chio had always been optimistic. She believed firmly that good would prevail, that people could triumph over adversity. Rarely had I seen her this uneasy and restless. I shook my head. Hard to say. It all depends on how much money they've got in their accounts. You all need to think this through. I continued with difficulty. The core issue here is that the developer doesn't have the funds, so the project was abandoned. They can't deliver the homes, and that's a breach of contract. Canceling the contract is straightforward, but if their accounts are empty, the money can't be refunded. The best case scenario is that you no longer have to repay the loans. That won't do. That won't do at all, Tan Xiao murmured, almost to herself. Aunt Wang's son is counting on that money for his hospital bills. Aunt Wang's son had collapsed when he learned the housing project was abandoned and hadn't regained consciousness since. He was still in the hospital. Of all the plaintiffs, Aunt Wang was the most desperate and helpless. I couldn't find the words to comfort them, not even a single syllable. Tan Xiao wasn't just a fragile individual. She had become a symbol. Behind her stood countless families like hers, families who had poured their life savings into a dream that turned into rubble. Sis, Tan Xiao suddenly asked, her eyes glinting, do you know what a debt mule is? Her words jolted me. Hearing that term from Tan Xiao was shocking. A debt mule is someone who fraudulently inflates or fabricates their assets through intermediaries to secure massive loans from financial institutions, splitting the proceeds with the intermediaries. Where did you hear that? Nowhere. Tan Xiao stammered, fiddling with her pinky finger. I was just curious. Don't even think about it, I said sharply. That's a crime. It's loan fraud. Tan Xiao forced a sheepish smile. I wasn't planning anything. Just asking. I heard some folks make tens of thousands, even millions doing it. They say the worst that can happen is not being able to take high-speed trains or fly. I mean, how many people in the world have even been on a plane, right? The worst-case scenario is prison, spending the rest of your life locked up, where planes won't even matter. I wanted to lecture her, but I felt it would come off as arrogant. I wanted to console her, but I couldn't find the strength. Just months ago, she had been full of hope, sharing her plans with me. Now she was eyeing a path of lifelong ruin. An unspeakable weight lodged in my chest, forcing me to say something cold and cutting. Through the frosted glass of my office, I could see shadows of people outside. They were sharing documents and contracts, offering each other encouragement. After leaving my office, Tan Xiao joined the group. The frail, elderly woman reached for her hand, her withered fingers gripping Tan Xiao's, rubbing them anxiously. When I first started as a trainee lawyer, I never imagined I'd feel fear like this. I closed my eyes, and the faces of those 13 households flashed through my mind. Only after taking a handful of melatonin could I barely manage to fall asleep. I couldn't afford any mistakes. The stakes were 13 families' futures, and the memory of my own mother, once desperate for help, haunted me. But the court hearing never came. On Monday morning, I received word. The government had taken over the abandoned development project. I met Tan Xiao at the construction site. The exposed, incomplete buildings that had been visible to the public just the day before were now surrounded by police tape, with officers moving about inside. Aunt Wang jumped. Tan Xiao exhaled a white puff of air as she spoke, the small cloud momentarily blurring my vision, obscuring everything. Why? I murmured to myself. The hearing was today. Why would she do this? She became a debt mule, Tan Xiao said hesitantly. I hadn't expected it. It wasn't Tan Xiao who walked down that path, but Aunt Wang, so simple and unassuming, even out of touch with the times. Stupid. I blurted out angrily. So stupid. She's stupid, and so are you. Didn't I make myself clear last time? Why do this? It's a death sentence. She had no choice, Tan Xiao murmured in defense. She'd spent all her savings on the house. The mortgage needed paying, and her son's hospital bills too. Aunt Wang was completely out of options. I tried to talk her out of it. I even gave her 3,000 yuan, but it wasn't enough. The intermediary paid her 10,000 yuan up front, just enough to cover the hospital fees and the next mortgage payment. I was stunned. 3,000 yuan wasn't a small amount for Tan Xiao, especially in such difficult circumstances. Yet she had still given it to someone with no means of repaying her. What I found even harder to accept was that Aunt Wang had gone down this path for the sake of a mere 10,000 yuan. She came to me, clutching my hands, rubbing them over and over. The garbage bag slung over her arm rustled with the bottles inside. She said she had to save some money for her son. to ease his burdens. She told me the intermediary promised her 1,000,000 yuan, enough to buy her son a new home so he wouldn't have to worry about these things anymore. Tan Xiu turned her head slightly, dabbing at her tears. She didn't have a mother who planned and agonized over her future, but Aunt Wang's love had moved her. A frail, stooped old woman with a heavy accent, searching for a way out in a jungle of concrete and steel, only to choose the wrong door. The day before the court hearing, Aunt Wang called Tan Xiu. Even over the phone, her trembling voice was unmistakable. "It's over," she said. "Those people are gone." After the loan had been approved, the other party withdrew the money immediately. Aunt Wang could no longer reach them. She needed that money for a new house for her son, for a new daughter-in-law to bring into the family. She prayed, cursed, and pleaded, hoping desperately for a reply. But all she got was silence. She considered going to the police, but remembered what I had told Tan Xiu. Her son couldn't have a criminal mother, nor a mother burdened with millions in debt. So she gave up. She climbed to the top of the half-finished building, her footsteps firm yet illusory on the concrete. She looked out, just as Tan Xiu once had. Next door was a villa district where the wealthy lived in comfort and elegance. Across the street was a bustling mall, its neon lights bright even at midnight, alive with activity. Her last call was to Tan Xiu. "Thank you for the 3,000 yuan, Xiao Qiu," she said. Aunt Wang had never moved so nimbly before. Like a fish returning to the sea, she leaped. Like a spark ignited, she fell, blazing toward the ground with overwhelming force. She burst into a crimson bloom, soaring and scattering like countless sparks. She threw herself into the molten core, extinguishing the flames cast down by the heavens. Tan Xiu eventually moved into her new home. She earned her driver's license and bought a second-hand van. She placed the large fish tank in her living room. It was lush with aquatic plants, but had no fish. When I asked her why, she said she didn't know what kind of fish to keep. At her housewarming party, I brought a bag of fish as a gift. It was a stunning bed of fish, its body shimmering in shades of blue and purple, with flowing, elegant fins. It flared and swam with fierce vitality, flamboyant and beautiful, just like Tan Xiu. I opened the bag and released it into the tank. The bed of fish gracefully swished its tail, creating ripples on the water's surface. The ripples spread across the tank as sparks from a brazier flickered below. It was Aunt Wang's one-year death anniversary. Standing on the 9th floor, Tan Xiu looked down. The people below were like ants, small and insignificant. The tiny flame was like the faint ash on the tip of a cigarette, a gentle flick scattering the past and all who were part of it. Tan Xiu turned away, her fingers brushing the glass, tracing the fish's fins. She said, "When Aunt Wang held my hand, she always loved to rub my little finger. I just hope that wherever she is now, someone is there to let her rub their little finger too." 2 tears rolled down Tan Xiu's face, clear and pure as her crystal-clear heart. The wind carried the yellow paper high, as if reaching 9 stories into the air. The firelight flickered, like the glow of incense in a temple carrying prayers and hopes. I silently wished for Tan Xiu to always remain so vibrant and genuine, for my mother to find peace and strength, and for Tan Xiu's wish to come true, that Aunt Wang finds someone to hold her little finger.